Thank you, Ceann Corla, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality. And I think it's important that we use every opportunity to discuss ways in which we can encourage and create pathways for more women to become involved, whether it's in civic life, obviously afforded greater pay equality, and then obviously for positions of leadership in both the public and private sector. And in our submission to the Assembly, we express the view that women themselves must be the ones that determine the solutions to dismantling the barriers they face. And equally, it was vital that migrant women, women from the LGBTQI plus community, carers, women outside the traditional workforce, caring for children, women with disabilities, traveller women, to name but a few, must be included in this process. So there are practical examples where government policy can positively challenge gender stereotypes. The Department of Education recently acknowledged that the gender gap at third level was heavily influenced by subject choices, and as a result, career guidance at second level was undertaken. This is a perfect example of where government can affect positive change. Despite some progress in the area, as a country we still do have a long way to go, and a recent OECD report on equality budgeting found that there is no overarching strategy or set of goals in Ireland, and that it's difficult to judge if any of the goals being set by departments independently are having any real impact or meeting needs. And I think you made reference to that, Minister, in relation to the kind of probably lack of data, and hopefully that's something that we're going to see change. The OECD set out really clear objectives, and I certainly would like to see the government taking some of these recommendations on board. We obviously were supportive of the gender pay gap legislation that I'm not sure is that still going through the Dáil. I remember we had a debate in the Convention Centre in relation to that. And obviously we engaged extensively with this legislation in the Justice Committee and then put forward a series of amendments to it. We believe that the Low Pay Commission has a vital role to play to tackle inequality and in work poverty, which disproportionately affects women. And I think we've seen that really in relation to COVID over the last kind of year and a half. A lot of the key roles in terms of the early years sector, in terms of healthcare, nursing, predominantly women who are in very, very low pay, but doing extremely vital work, and something that I think everybody, there's many of us that never took that for granted, but I think everybody really saw how valuable that was over the last 18 months. And while I think it's important that the public discourse has shifted in the last few decades and women who smash glass ceilings are celebrated, there must be more focus on the struggle many women have in reaching even junior management level, or the gaps that negatively impact on career progression, earnings and pension entitlements. And that's something I suppose I've always been struck by in relation to pensions, because it is often women that maybe have to give up working outside the home, often through the cost of childcare, or will end up, taking parental leave for a day or two a week or whatever it might be, and all that sort of juggling, and then realise at the end of that's affected their pension. And you don't generally, none of us really think about pensions until, maybe later in life. So that is something I think that does affect women. So 3 of the 45 recommendations made by the Assembly include recommendations for constitutional change in the area of childcare, and I'd like to just take a few minutes to specifically mention 3 of these in particular: to a publicly funded, accessible and regulated model of childcare over the next decade, increase the state share of GDP spent on childcare from the current 0.3% to at least 1% by no later than 2030, and paid leave for parents should cover the first year of a child's life, be non-transferable, provide lone parents with the same total leave period as a couple, and be incentivised by increasing payment levels to encourage increased take-up. And I think that's really important in relation to lone parents as well. We've obviously, and we've regularly had these discussions in relation to the early years and childcare sector, and we've obviously would feel very strongly in relation to having a publicly funded model, and looking at reducing fees for parents, but also introducing a decent wage scale for those who are working in the sector. And then I know we often do talk about it, encouraging women back to work or maybe education, but there isn't always the infrastructure to support it. And in an early years and childcare survey that I actually did last year, the one issue parents had, and this was predominantly women, was that they were simply locked out of work because sometimes it was access in childcare, there wasn't a space available, and sometimes it was the cost, and sometimes it was both factors. And I would imagine that cost is really the overriding factor. And while it's the pandemic shone a light on this like never before, I really think it probably took some men by surprise as to how vital this sector is to the economy. But I don't think that very many women were surprised by that. We've had situations where doctors, nurses, retail staff, carers and other vital frontline workers could not get to work because of childcare. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Assembly and their members and the Chair for the extensive work that they have undertaken on behalf of their fellow citizens. The role they've played in changing Ireland to be a better, more inclusive and fairer society for women is commendable, and I thank them for that. And now, as you said yourself, Minister, we must match their commitment by accepting their recommendations and implementing them without delay. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.